to math class. Today, we're going to do a variety of activities. As you can see from the warm-up, that we have the following activities. Of course, the agenda is composed of doing your warm-up, which is a review from the material that we've been doing now at this point, dealing with graphing. Specifically today, we're going to look at a new topic related to box plots. And so with that in mind, we will do a fair model. So, and you'll also receive a handout. As far as class goes, an activity that we're going to do together is called class sibling activity. And it's data that you worked with prior. So you are familiar with the data, and we're going to actually use it to do a box plot for today's class. And then, of course, we're going to talk about your practice at home and complete your exit ticket. As part of today's activities, you are going to need the following materials. You're going to need your math interactive notebook, graph paper, pencils, and colored pencils or crayons, whichever you choose to help you color code the information. So, on that note, we are going to get started. Of course, at this point in time, I would have given students opportunity to complete the warm-up, go over the answers briefly, make sure that they had an understanding of material that really should have known, which is actually going to prep us for today's class. And so in today's class, we always want to start with what our goals and objectives are for the day. And so we're using data representation. Specifically, we're using 612A, which is students will represent numeric data graphically, including box plots. And see, there's a variety of plots. There's histograms, there's dot plots, and so forth. But today specifically, we're going to focus on creating box plots. So you will need your interactive math notebook today, because as we always like to put our new vocabulary into that. And so we're going to use a graphic organizer known as the Freer model we've used in the past to be able to complete this new vocabulary information. So as you can see, and you should be writing this, is our word or concept is box plot. Now this is often referred to as box and whisker plot as well. And part of that reason that they say box and whisker is because essentially the ends of the box plot look like whiskers when you think about like a cat's whiskers. And so, but generally you will see in writing in the text and so forth, just simply note it as box plot. One of the first things we always begin with is what is the definition of that particular word or concept. So for us, our definition is that it's a graphical method for showing 5 key summary data pieces. And those data pieces include some things that we already have used, as well as some new terms. So it includes what's called the median, the lower quartile, the upper quartile, the maximum, and the minimum. Now, you are already familiar with median, you're already familiar with minimum, and you understand maximum. The two new terms that are present are lower and upper quartile. And as we talk about this and do examples, you will get a better understanding of those two terms as well. As always, we like to talk about facts or truthful points about that particular lesson. And so for us, gonna just kind of note here what some of those key pieces are, is that you tend to see what's a box, because ideally it's a box plot. So the box is composed of what's called the interquartile range. And range is actually a term that we've used in the past too. And range is just simply from your largest value subtracting your smallest value. And essentially, you get your range of values for that data set. And so it's important to know that in the quartile range, you have the two interquartile, or the interquartile, your upper and your lower end. And basically, your lower quartile is the median of the lower set of the scores. We know that your upper quartile is the median of the upper set of scores. And the number in between those two sets is the median, which we learned before that median is simply the middle value. Now, whenever you have an odd set of data, it's easy to figure out the median because you can count up and know the middle one between the lower end and the upper end is your median. But whenever you have an even set of numbers, you always have to remember, that's right, yes, you have to remember that you have to add those two middle values and then divide by 2, and then that will give you the median. So your median separates what will ultimately be your quartiles. Okay. And then if we're looking at an example here on our map, and we want to make sure that we kind of note here what our values are. So you have, in this example, we have the picture values. And so we know that this box, the very end we said are the whiskers, which consist of our minimum and our maximum values. And so your minimum is, we already know, is your smallest number in the data set, and your maximum is the largest value in your data set. Your median is the middle of those numbers. So in this case, we have a median that's 50. Our lowest value, or our minimum, is 10, and our maximum is 90. Our interquartiles, which is found by doing, once we have the median of the large data set, we then look at the lower numbers that fall below the median, and we look at the middle number there. And we do the same thing. We find the one that's in between, or if it's 2, if it's even, we add them together and divide by 2 to find our lower quartile number. So in this case, our lower quartile value is 20. Then we do the same with the upper quartile. We look at the numbers that are after the median value of 50, and we determine which is your middle value. And that middle value then is our interquartile upper quartile value. And in that case, it is 70. Okay. So, and then of course, we want to make sure that we put the official box in our whiskers to make the plot. And so, but also in giving you an example, you always want to be mindful of what are not, what's not a actual box and whisker plot. And so, of course, there's so many ways that you can depict data. And so some of the ways that you can depict data will include such things as a bar graph. You may use line graphs, as I mentioned earlier. There are dot plots, there are histograms. There's all kinds of ways that you can graphically or pictorially depict data. But the way that we're choosing to do it today is going to be the box plot. Any questions? So, of course, at this time, I would entertain any questions students had, and then I would move on to the next item, which is on our agenda, is to do one together. So we've completed the Freya model at this time, and then we will move on to the digital handout that I would give students. This is something I would download, make sure that I would email the students so that they would have it in advance of the class period. And we would go through the examples together in terms of making sure that students first always remember that when they're given a data set, they first have to order the values from smallest to largest, or in ascending order. And so They can clearly see that their minimum is 30, their maximum is 88. In this case, we see the median value is 60, and then we have the lower quartile 42, the upper quartile is 66, and then that would create our graph. And so after students would complete this is our I do time. We would then move into our we do time. And so for we do, I would have the students recall the data that we've already previously used, that we've collected in the class, dealing with class sibling data. And as you can see, I would already have it pre-visual. I would use the whiteboard that's actually built into the computer, but just for now, I'm using it this method. And we can see the data points. We have 9 students in this class. And so we have one student that had no siblings. We had one student that had 7. And then we had what seemed to be the mode was 1 sibling with a median value of 2. And of course, I would make sure that my students knew how to get the mean, median, and the other types of measures. And then I would ask my students to find the interquartile range. And so median of the lower value is your lower value. So in this case, that median value is, we know that the median is 2. Right? So when we look at these lower values, we find that the lower quartile is 1. And then we also see that well, actually, it's a combination of these two numbers, which when you say 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 divided by 2, of course, is 1. And then, of course, the same will happen here because we are left with 4 digits. And so that means we have to add the 2 middle values, divide by 2. So those 2 middle values in this case being 3 and 4. So we get 7. 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. Okay. So then next, my students would have to actually graph, and they would have to show me representation of this on the graph. And I would check to make sure. I would go around my, check and make sure I'm looking at all students on the screen, that they are actually completing the task, and that they're marking it as they should on the actual graph. I would make sure that is correct. So after that is done, I would then move into our next piece, which is to basically do talk about what they would do for practice at home after they complete this activity, and make sure that it's correct and everything. We would talk about what they would do, and how one way I tend to differentiate is that, students that are struggling, I may give them like a few problems, and, not really heavy quantitative, but more so that they get the concept. For kids that are more advanced, I can challenge them a little bit more, maybe give them longer problems, they have to determine values, in the data set and so forth. So that's one of the ways that I would kind of break it up, is that they wouldn't necessarily have the exact same homework as far as in terms of difficulty level of the material. I may include actual word problems for my more advanced students to figure out some of the data. Okay, and then ultimately for the final piece after that is to complete the exit ticket. And it would be essentially, I would probably provide some short type of graph of a diagram, and I would have them identify different parts of it, like, what value is this, or can you tell me where the interquartile is, or, for the upper quartile and things like that. So I would just see that they make sure that they know the new terminology, as well as they understand and recall the previous terms that we know at this point in time in the lesson. So that really would be the basis of just the introduction to learning how to plot with box plots, specifically with the students. And then, of course, that would bring us to the end of the class period. Of course, if there was any questions still left, I would totally entertain those. But I think by this point in time, students would have been successful at having understanding. They would have the study guide as additional piece. And the added examples or interactive notebooks that they can refer to from the example as well.